BMW has been known for creating and even owning certain segments of both the car and the motorcycle world. In the car world, it's the BMW M3 and the 3 Series, and in the motorcycle world, it's the BMW GS. This specifically is the 2024 BMW F900 GS Adventure. My name is Tyler, this is Out Motorsports. Let's go for a ride. So before we go for our ride, I just want to do a quick walk around of this 2024 F900 GS Adventure, because much like BMW's cars nowadays, this is a pretty high-tech motorcycle. So this is the middleweight adventure bike in the BMW GS lineup. The more entry-level model is the BMW G310 GS. The middle models are the F850 and the F900 GS. And the top of the line holy grail is now the BMW R1300 GS with their legendary Boxer motor. Starting with the basics, this is an 895cc parallel twin engine with a 270-degree crank. It makes 105 horsepower at 8,500 RPM and 68 foot-pounds of torque at 6,700 RPM. This engine is shared with their F900XR, which is a more street-oriented sport tourer. It has a 34-inch seat height in this adventure trim and weighs about 530 pounds, which is up from the standard F900 GS. This specifically, like I said, is the adventure trim, and in previous years, that would have meant this is more off-road focused. But for 2024, BMW kind of did a complete 180. They realized that most of the people who ride their adventure models don't really take them off-road that much. They actually use them to put a ton of highway miles and go on long touring trips. So even though this has the taller seat, you'll see it now comes with more street-oriented tires, and the fuel tank is up from 4 gallons to just over 6. And it has a bigger adjustable windscreen to help with wind buffeting on the long journeys, as well as some handguards. Moving down to the front wheels, they are 21-inch front wheels with 305mm discs on either side with 2 piston Brembo calipers. The rear is a single disc with a Brembo as well. Moving down along the side, you have your bottom skid plate to protect the underside in case you do some off-roading and adventuring. And moving further along, obviously you see the crash bars and this quick shifter here. This is where the tech in this bike starts, but certainly doesn't end. Interestingly enough, even though it is a little bit more street-oriented than the previous adventure models, it doesn't have rubber-mounted pegs. This is your standard grippy off-road oriented peg, but honestly, once you get going down the road, it doesn't really make a difference. Nothing on this bike vibrates to the point where it bothers you. Moving further on back, you have your passenger pegs mounted to the frame here, and your dynamic or adaptive suspension with the ZF damper. This bike specifically came with a few BMW factory accessories mounted to it. You can get hard cases for the side. You see this one is equipped with the hardware to mount them, as I believe all Adventures come standard with. But my specific one has this BMW Motorrad bag that is roomy enough. I'm able to fit an entire backpack in here. I just took this on a weekend trip and I fit a weekend's worth of clothes, only 1 pair of shoes, but fit it all in here. It does have a waterproof lining, and if you want to look a little bit further in here, it has a little mesh zipper to hold your paperwork and things like that. Various pockets on the side. Super handy. And when you get going down the road, obviously you don't know what's there. It's much lighter than hard side cases on either side. Moving up, like I said, this is a 6.2 gallon fuel tank over the standard roughly 4.2 gallon on the regular F900 GS, allowing for over 200 miles of range. It has BMW's suite of essentially their motorcycle version of iDrive here, with various menus for you to choose from, but the long and short of it is heated grips, adjustable suspension, cruise control, and a bunch of high-tech, both ABS and traction control that is lean sensitive to stop you from doing something stupid in a corner when it's wet or not. This does have various drive modes that we can turn on and check out now, but basically you start with road, dynamic, enduro, and rain. Rain is the most conservative. It dampens the throttle response and makes the ABS and cruise control, or I'm sorry, the ABS and stability control more intrusive. I've been riding it in road the whole time. It keeps all of the electronics on and the throttle response is pretty natural. Dynamic is a little bit sportier, and enduro, so I'm told, is essentially everything off. It lets you have a lot of fun, but still keeps you out of the most dangerous trouble. We do have this other BMW accessory. It's an accessory phone mount and also a wireless charger. Now, I have the latest iPhone in the standard size, and I do have to take my phone out of the case to use it on this, but the wireless charger does indeed do a good job at actually charging, unlike some wireless chargers in cars, and it stays in here very securely. If you have a bigger phone, it might be a little bit hard to fully fit into here, but as far as factory accessories go, I love this. I've used it the entire time I've had the motorcycle, and it's super convenient, and this little knob down here allows you to tighten it even further on the side right here, so your phone doesn't fall out. And there's a light right here that shows you whether or not it's charging. The windscreen is adjustable. Right now it's in its highest setting, and just a quick flip down puts it down into the lowest. So there's a lot of very easy adjustments here. Things that don't need to be overly complicated are not, but the electronics and the various menus in this screen can get a little bit complicated. And I'm going to be honest, I haven't really used much other than this first My Vehicle setting right here. You're able to toggle up and down. You toggle up to see the tach and your fuel gauge, and as you toggle down, you get even more information like the fluid temps, your tire pressures, how many miles you have left to empty, as well as a alternator voltage gauge. So it's helpful to have this information, and you can continue to scroll through and see a ton of things. It also has adjustable suspension for if you have a passenger on the back, which is what those two helmets are. They're recommended tire pressures if you have a passenger on the back. So there's a lot of really interesting tech in this that if you live with the motorcycle is really useful. But in my short time with it, it's also been just as easy to kind of ignore all of this tech and just trust that the safety features are there to save me if I do anything stupid, but go down the road and really, I've only used the adjustable suspension and the cruise control. So without further ado, enough of me rambling. Let's get this thing out on the road, go for a little ride, see how it rides, and end up at the pub for a little dinner, shall we? Okay, so let's set off on the F900 GS adventure on a little ride, just making sure that my bag is zip tight. Now, first things first, pushing your leg or getting your leg over this motorcycle and lifting it up off the kickstand like that it's tall. I'm not gonna lie. I am 5'9". I have a 29-inch inseam. I have pretty short and stubby legs, and this bike being 540 pounds and having a 34-inch seat height is not necessarily something that you would expect out of what one would call a middleweight adventure bike. In fact, there's certain R1300 GSs that have a lower seat height than this. But much like previous adventure trims, this bike is really made for going down the road, and once you start moving, you realize that the seating position on this is very relaxed, and once you get moving, that height is not really anything particularly scary. In fact, it's quite comfortable, but I am on my tippy toes. Now, setting off, use the quick shifter right away. So, the quick shifter is great 95% of the time. This is the first bike that I've really spent a lot of time on with a quick shifter like that. The only thing I really have to compare it to is a Triumph that is in our personal fleet, and I will say it is better than the Triumph as long as it can hold together, because the Triumph quick shifter, quite honestly, has not been doing so great on the longevity side of things. But this quick shifter is good and mostly smooth. When you get into the lower RPMs, especially the downshifts in the lower RPMs, it will buck a little bit when you throw in things like elevation changes and all. But for the most part, it does pretty good. So for right now, I have the suspension in regular road mode, but if you want to start to really dip this into the twisties, which we're going to do in a little bit, it's beneficial for anybody, even the more basic rider, to throw this in the more sport suspension. The regular mode is very soft and very wallowy, and it's great for going around town and dealing with a lot of bumps and undulations in the road. But when you really need that body control, it reminds you more of a dirt bike. And obviously this does have off-road chops, so the electronic suspension is there for a reason, right? Going through the twisties here, generally a handling characteristic that you get with a 21-inch front wheel is that it doesn't like to change direction very quickly, and compared to a bike with a 17-inch front wheel or even a 19-inch front wheel, it does change direction a little bit slower. But that doesn't take away from the fact that this bike has a balance to it. And the 21-inch front wheel obviously is beneficial off-road and even on the road. Driving this back from New Jersey, where compared to here, the pavements are way more rough with a lot of potholes and undulations and things that you would want to try to avoid in most motorcycles. This kind of just went over them unscathed. This, as a whole, this motorcycle feels generally unbothered by whatever you want to throw at it. So while we're behind this truck, I'll throw the suspension into, well, number one, I'll move the menu to a place where you can see what's going on, and then I'll throw the suspension one click from road into dynamic mode, and that immediately takes most of the bounciness away from this suspension. When you're just going down the road, if you hit a bump and you have it in regular mode, it almost feels like it doesn't have any shock control, like the shocks are blown. Obviously that's fine for off-road, but on the road you don't want that. When you switch it over, there's an immediate noticeable difference. Now, this does have different ride modes: road, dynamic, enduro, and rain. I've kept it in road. Not only do the different ride modes adjust the suspension, but they also mainly adjust the throttle response. And in anything past road mode, I found the throttle response to be a little bit too touchy for my taste. You take off from a light, and it almost feels like it gives you half of the bike's available throttle within the first like 25% of twist. And having ridden it around in road mode most of my time with it, it was a little bit, it caught me by surprise at first, actually. This 270-degree parallel twin may not be, well, I'll frame it this way. This engine is always something that I didn't really think twice about, because BMW is known for their boxers, their flat twin engines that have been around for over 100 years now at this point. They date back to World War II. So in my head, I always thought BMW kind of just phoned in these parallel twins, but I could not have been more wrong. This is such a typical BMW, both car and motorcycle, in the way that, number one, it builds power and the amount of torque it has. Typical to all BMW engines, this thing has great torque, even from down low in the RPM range, but redline is 8,500 RPM, and that's where peak power is. So this engine, you can chug all the way down from 2,000 RPM all the way up to redline, and in typical BMW fashion, it doesn't really stop pulling. It's very rewarding. And the difference between a 270-degree parallel twin and a 180-degree parallel twin, like a lot of Hondas, is that sound. The firing order gives it a different sound and a different character, more character. And the uneven firing order is a purposeful thing, kind of like how Harleys have that lub-dub, lub-dub, lub-dub sort of sound to their idle. While we're just cruising along like this, I can at least talk about the fueling of this engine along with the great power band. Even when you're kind of putzing around town at low speed and low RPMs, the fueling in this is pretty great. It's not perfect, but it's definitely better than some bikes. I have it up in 5th gear now, just barely chugging along at 2,000 RPM, and it lugs, but it doesn't do anything unpredictable. It doesn't jolt your body or the motorcycle back and forth. There's not a bunch of drivetrain lash. So in typical BMW German fashion, the fueling is pretty on point, which, coming from a car, is not a conversation that most viewers are probably used to hearing, but in motorcycles, getting that fuel injection just right is still a skill that not every manufacturer has fully mastered. We'll try to get a little bit more of a better run at this road at its actual speed limit, as opposed to 5 under the speed limit. So we'll turn around and do another loop, shall we? So one of the great things about the riding position of an adventure bike, and as well as the seat on this bike, is that you're in an upright seating position and your legs are super comfortable. They're not too far tucked behind your body. In fact, they're basically perfectly neutral on this GS. But when you get into a twisty road like this, it doesn't really make you miss. In fact, I personally don't miss a sport bike riding position at all. The wide handlebars give you a feeling of control, and the fact that the seat is able to be, you can scoot up closer to the tank or you can scoot back to give yourself more leg room. It also allows you to sit in a position that gives you better feel and better control of the bike through corners like this. And when you scoot up real close to the tank with these wide handlebars and this upright riding position, you really do, this is a bit of a yump right here, you really do feel like this is kind of like a little dirt bike. And it allows you to center yourself in what's essentially the pivot point of the motorcycle and feel its balance. And nothing, I said it before, but nothing really seems to bother this bike. Obviously, I'm not going fast, but this is a tighter road, and just dipping it into the corners like that, it does exactly what you want it to. So traffic's a little rough today, but as far as places to ride in Northern Virginia are concerned, this is a great little place to take in a motorcycle with some nice twisties and some good views. You don't get many good roads like this around here unless you're driving far down towards like Skyline Drive. And fun fact about the place that we're riding here is this is protected. Northern Virginia's water supply comes from the river that runs through these properties, and the government has made it so that if you own a house here, it needs to be on at least 5 acres of land, which means this will forever be a lovely place for us to ride and review motorcycles together. So we're heading out to a road where I'm able to get this up to more sustained highway speeds, which is a good time to talk about what this bike is really all about, which is putting miles on it. BMW GSs are known and around the world for people putting hundreds and thousands of miles on them, and even though that is more what is now the R1300 GS with that boxer engine, these middleweight ones with the parallel twins are quickly becoming known for that as well. And the smaller or more middleweight version started with the single cylinder 650 GS, which was actually a Rotax engine. And even though that was a thumper, they're known for being pretty indestructible. And from what I'm able to see, even though we obviously can't comment on long-term reliability, people are putting hundreds of thousands of miles on these as well. Okay, highway speeds it is. That light takes a while. Because generally it doesn't pick up motorcycles, it's a weight-sensitive light. So get this bike up before we hit traffic at 65, 70, even well above 70 miles an hour into like Northern Virginia. Traffic, so much traffic here. But anyway, get this up closer to like 75 or 80 miles an hour, and there's no real bad vibrations to speak of. This bike will do 75 or 80 just fine. It'll sit at between 5,000 and 6,000 RPM doing that, so right smack in the middle of the rev range. And it chugs along all day doing that just fine. You have great passing power even in 6th gear on the highway. There's no bad vibrations in the handlebars. There's no bad vibrations in your feet, even though these pegs are not rubber mounted pegs. There's nothing unenjoyable about riding this motorcycle on the highway. The wind protection is fantastic. I'm 5'9", and with this windscreen in the highest mode, it kind of starts to hit right above my visor when you're on the highway. And if you put the windscreen down, you get all the wind on your chest and midsection if it's a hot day and you want the breeze. So you're not fully cocooned in a pocket of air here, but it's really good for long distance cruising and the long hauls. Another interesting thing while we're stopped here, you might notice this SOS button down here, just like their cars and kind of like Chevrolet's OnStar. If something happens, you can press this SOS button and it will dispatch help to your GPS enabled location connected to the bike. So that's a fun piece of safety technology that this bike has that I think actually really does make a difference for motorcycle riders and for anybody who may be going out doing long distances on this bike by themselves if they're not in a group. The big overarching theme for this motorcycle, and the thing that surprised me the most, is one, just how much, having lived with it now, I would consider it over a Boxer engine GS. Like I said before, I always thought that this was just a middleweight adventure bike that BMW was doing to compete with their competitors. There's plenty of other middleweight adventure bikes that have similar specs to this that on paper might be cheaper, and you might be wondering, why is the BMW so much more expensive? And this bike is well over $17,000, and to get into a big boy GS with the Boxer, you can't really get into one of those for under 20. So you save yourself a couple grand, and if you don't want to deal with the adventure version of this bike, you can save a couple grand even further. But the thing that I've really come to appreciate on this bike is just the amount of technology it has, and I think that is what sets it apart over its competitors. And when you get on something like a Triumph Tiger or a Yamaha and compare it to this, a bike that is directly comparable, this just has nicer tech, a nicer suite of technology. And as a still somewhat newer rider, I've sort of started to lean on that technology, not in a dangerous way, but it's nice to know that if it starts to rain on your ride, that you have traction control that will take care of you and not let you open the throttle too much to the point where it throws you over the handlebars. And just the safety technology that you know always has your back, but you hope that you never need. That is something that's been so great with this bike. The technology is something that I thought would get in the way, but after living with this for nearly 1,000 miles, the technology didn't really get in the way. It kind of blended into the background when I wanted it to, but when I wanted to use it and when I felt like I needed it, it was there. So now that we're getting into town, I do just want to say thank you to BMW North America for loaning this to me for a month. It certainly was not a short loan, but it gave me plenty of opportunity to get to know this bike and really spend time with it and take it on our own sort of adventures. So if you want to see more of those adventures or possibly read about them, go to outmotorsports.com, where I wrote about our trip to Fallingwater. But in the meantime, subscribe here if you aren't already for hopefully more motorcycle content and certainly more car content. Thank you guys so much for watching. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time.